We're finally here, the final, allegedly, arc of the Genshin Impact storyline. On this planet, we learn a lot about the Harbingers, the workings of Snezhnaya, and some of the various plans of the Tsaritsa. We also had some big lore theories confirmed, disproven, and others are still left waiting in the wings. The world quests in Snezhnaya might go even further in that regard, but I haven't done them yet. This video is specifically about the 7.0 Archon quests, and the lore implications within. Let's break it down. I'm tempted to start this video by complaining about the way they decided to completely lock the entire region behind the first couple hours of the new Archon quest, which they haven't done since Inazuma, but unlike Inazuma, you can't even access it in co-op to get your character materials and stuff. But that rant would take too long and put everyone in a bad mood about something that isn't even related to lore. So moving on, upon entering Snezhnaya, Paimon gets sick due to a combination of the extreme cold and something we learn about later. Spoiler, it's exactly what I theorized in a short that I released shortly after the Snezhnaya ecology teaser. Snezhnaya has some sort of field that wards off celestial beings. Though in fairness, I'm far from the only person who thought that was the case. We get separated from Paimon and coincidentally stumble across this device that has been lost for thousands of years and meant to be used by a Descender. It was likely designed by the third Descender, but I don't want to theorize too much about it because there's an entire questline related to this thing that I haven't done yet. So I'll wait until I actually do it. It helps us escape and get to a cabin where we reunite with Paimon, who has been rescued by Pierro, the Jester himself. They drop more hints that we learn about later, about how Pierro expects Paimon to recognize him. The big question is what Pierro was even doing here. Paimon says that he acted like he wasn't expecting to see her, but honestly, I think she's wrong, because the best explanation I can think of for Pierro showing up like this is that he heard from Sandrone that Traveler and Paimon were about to come to Snezhnaya, and he specifically wanted to see Paimon as soon as possible, to make sure she wouldn't suffer the moment she entered the nation. After seeing that it mostly just made her weak and didn't outright hurt her, he decided it was fine to just leave her with Traveler so he could return to business. We also get this new multiplayer-ish mechanic. We can put down little prime ice constructs, and other players can sometimes see them in their worlds. We can even attach messages to them. This is straight out of Dark Souls, and it makes me wonder about the lore explanation for why this is happening. Because the lore explanation in Dark Souls for why players can interact with each other like this is that space-time is literally disintegrating, because the universe is trying to end, but godlike beings keep doing crazy stuff to postpone it. Each player is in their own separate timeline, and the breaking down of space-time allows them to occasionally send messages, join up for co-op, or invade each other, essentially coming from a parallel universe. So the question is, just how much about this mechanic did Genshin take from Dark Souls? Because in 2 videos now, I've brought up the description of Athame Artis, and mentioned how the story it tells is just like that, the lore of Dark Souls. And now we have an in-game mechanic that is also a reference to that. Kinda sus. Let me get even crazier just for a second. Dark Souls also has something called going hollow, which is basically when a person loses all hope in humanity and just becomes a monster. And there's the subtle implication that when someone quits playing Dark Souls, that means their character went hollow. So what if the Abyss is the representation of every player who has ever quit playing Genshin? And I'm just gonna leave that there. Let's continue with the quest. Then we spend a lot of time learning about the state of Snezhnaya when we meet Alyosha in a nearby town. Project Stuja is evidently a plan for resource allocation. But Tsaritsa's ultimate goal requires tons of energy, so Project Stuja is designed to funnel as much energy to the Fatui's research headquarters as they can, while still ensuring the rest of Snezhnaya has enough to power their Kresnik's torches and survive the cold. And in this town, things are made worse because the mayor and this guy decided to steal and hoard resources for their own profit. That's in addition to the fact that apparently a mysterious monster is causing the snowstorms to be even worse, and it's such a serious threat that the Tsaritsa herself had to go and deal with it. We learn absolutely nothing about this monster throughout the entire Archon quest. I don't know if it's expanded upon in a world quest, but otherwise I guess we might learn about it in the next patch. They mention it so many times without elaboration that I have to assume it's really important. I thought but maybe it could be related to the Cryo Sovereign, or perhaps another immortal creature from the Cataclysm like Bakunawa, which none of the Pyro Archons in history were able to truly defeat. And there's also an ancient monster or god or something named Chernobog, which could be related, but who knows at this point. The next big introduction we get is to the Shadow Realm. They told us about this in the live stream, and we still don't know much about it. I expect we'll learn more after doing the actual quest lines related to the new gameplay, but for now all I can tell you is that it's the train dimension. The reason Snezhnaya has so many trains is because the Bel Tsar opened a rift to the train dimension, and now they can just pull trains out of it whenever they need one. When the Eye of Grey says its purpose is to do blank from the Shadow Realm, he was trying to say he's the one who fetches the trains. But in addition to that very serious and definitely canon lore drop, I noticed some other structures flying around in there. I tried to get a good look at them, which seemed like it might be Unified Civilization architecture, but I can't say for sure. But anyway, we can fast forward through most of Act 1 as it's almost entirely set up for the upcoming quests in the region. Paimon is still sick the whole time and stays at the hotel. Traveler learns more about the plight of the average citizen of Snezhnaya. We meet up with Sandrone and help her with a monster attack, where we also meet Odette. This is where the other big moment of Act 1 happens, where we find the Exaiphanes Blade. Before we freak out too much that Phanes is in the name, note that in half the other languages, including the native Chinese, its name translates to just something about the stars, like stellar-edged sword. But other than that, its description seems to have something to do with the Voyager. It's not a clear confirmation that it belonged to the Voyager, nor the Third Descender, who seems to be related to all the secret stuff in Snezhnaya, but it seems likely it's related to one or both of them. It's also somehow directly related to the statues of the Seven in Snezhnaya, as using cryo on them is how you level it up. We'll probably need to unlock more areas of Snezhnaya and find more statues of the Seven to learn anything more. The last few points of Act 1, we meet up with Child, Sandrone, and Odette, where it comes out that Traveler is responsible for Signora's death. While Odette and Signora didn't get along, there are still some feelings there. Child arranges personal security for Paimon, so Traveler doesn't have to worry. Paimon says she thinks the source of the negative field that's affecting her is inside the Armory Palace. Traveler attends an opera and meets Vodyanitsa, and learns that both she and Alyosha are members of the Rokat, essentially the rebels who are trying to put a stop to Project Stuja, so that the people of Snezhnaya can get full access to energy resources again. They try to investigate supporters of Project Stuja to find ways to lessen their support, as well as gain intel on the purpose of the project, to maybe fight it that way. A factory owner named Chuganov is exploiting the situation, so he's one target, and Mitya works for the Fatui in the energy division, so he's another target, both to help interfere with Chuganov and to gain info on Project Stuja. So our new Rokat buddies set up a meeting with Mitya. Not a whole lot gets revealed here because Mitya's scarf is apparently better at keeping secrets than he is. Lastly, we sit on an Iveche session to learn what we can there. Lots of politics happens, and a character is introduced to remind us all that Genshin wants to appeal to kids. But we ultimately learn that there's a rogue Rokat member named Lelek, who engages in intimidation tactics to force people to change their votes to vote against Project Stuja, and Chuganov was their last victim, as he suddenly votes against it. And at the end of it, we have a chat with Child and Sandrone, and determine that the most likely identity of Lelek is none other than our latest playable character, Odette. So let's get to the big section of the patch. I don't need to rehash the whole mystery since you all already played it, and since it was all fake, it doesn't have too many lore implications. So rather than rehashing the quest, I'll just go over what was actually happening. Problem number 1. The theater sits on a leyline anomaly. The Angels of Hyperborea tampered with the leylines in this area, so they don't properly draw in the souls of people who die in the theater. They did this so that the leylines would accept their fey creations, but that's not important for now. Problem 2. Any soul that does not get drawn into the leylines in a certain amount of time will break free from Ronova's control, and while it's normally her authority to guide the souls of the dead, she will not be able to do that if people die in the theater and their souls refuse to go into the leylines. As such, there are currently 2 souls of the dead stuck inside the theater, and apparently, after a long time, they might transform into something terrible. So Ronova really needs to get them taken care of. Problem number 3. Ronova Ronova placed a curse on an unknown number of humans, such that if they attempt to develop technology to fight the Heavenly Principles, they just die, and everyone near them dies too. However, she isn't allowed to just kill whoever she wants whenever she wants, so they get revived shortly after, but ideally they forget whatever they were just doing, so their progress is interrupted. But apparently, in order for it to work, their souls still need to enter and exit the ley lines. Unfortunately, Mitya, a scientist working on the Tsaritsa's project to overthrow the Heavenly Principles, has a eureka moment in the middle of the theater, so everyone dies. Putting all three together, because so many people died at once, the ley line obstruction stopped them all from entering the ley lines, risking that they linger too long and break from Ronova's authority, or worse, suffer the consequences of the two who had already been lingering for centuries. The entire section takes place in some kind of afterlife within the theater, as none of their souls can enter the ley lines at this time. That also means Ronova needs to personally come intervene to sort the situation out. She needs to separate out the two souls who were already supposed to be dead from the ones that need to revive, and somehow convince them to enter the ley lines willingly to stop them from causing problems. But she's not exactly a people person, so she needs everyone else to do it for her. Plus, she assumes everyone would be upset with her and try to resist if she just came out and explained the situation. Yeah, hey, I just killed all of you, but could you help me out and get rid of these two bozos? And so we get this whole murder mystery where everyone has to figure out for themselves what needs to be done. Also, the writers seem to try to portray her as just being evil, because after the second spirit accepts their death, there is no longer any point to continuing the situation, but Ronova does it anyway, as if she enjoys tormenting the remaining people. It seems to me like the writers are trying really hard to make us view Ronova as a villain, when Natlan proved that she's not. In Natlan, she risked the ire of the Heavenly Principles just to help the people create the Ode of Resurrection and fight the Abyss. But now, suddenly, she enjoys tormenting the souls of the dead just for fun? Whatever you say, Genshin. I'll assume she's acting that way because she knows Mitya is researching how to destroy both her and the Heavenly Principles and wants to put him in his place, so to speak. The only other thing to mention are the dream sequences. In context, it's clear that the Black Mist is the ley lines. When the people give up, that's them accepting their death and entering the ley lines, which seems like the normal thing for souls to do. Not that it matters in this case, since they're all going to get revived anyway. There might be interesting things in the specifics of each dream sequence, like the star that's supposed to save people being Odette's core Ignis, which is later the thing that allows Traveler to wake up early, but I bet a lot of it is related to future stories, so any guesses will just be shots in the dark. So let's get to the ending sequence. After the theater situation is resolved, we discover the Jester took Paimon into the Armory Palace. We bust in with Odette. On the way, everything starts exploding, and the Curse of Death gets triggered once again. Odette's core Ignis helps us to wake up early, allowing us to reach the scene of the trigger and come face to face with Ronova, which we already knew was going to happen because of the trailer. She tells us to stop interfering with Snezhnaya because otherwise they might drag us into a battle we won't escape. Then, Ronova sees Paimon and confirms the most obvious thing ever, which is that Paimon is from Celestia. But she says more than that, which we'll dig into in a bit. Ronova wants to take Paimon back to Celestia, but Pierro and the Traveler are having none of it. In the fight, Traveler lands a hit on Ronova, but not only was Ronova distracted by the people waking up, which she was trying to avoid, but keep in mind Ronova is actively being suppressed by Mistelten this entire time. So don't get too excited. Yeah, it's not finished, but we know it already has some effect on celestial beings. Either way, we stall her long enough that she has to just leave to avoid anyone else seeing her. And that's the end of the climax, after which we can ask Pierro some questions. Firstly, he says the researchers gave Paimon a way to counteract the effects of Mistelten, which in itself is a little alarming, because if that's possible, that means the Shades and the Heavenly Principles could probably do the same thing, rendering the Tsaritsa's entire plan completely worthless outright. But either way, they confirm that Ronova won't let them finish it, so they have to find some way to remove her as an obstacle without being able to use their anti-celestial weapon to do it. Speaking of which, the weapon is built out of the power of the third Descender, harvested from stellar linchpins. Given that the Gnosis are the remains of the third Descender, I'm sure they are a part of it. However, Pierro kinda implies that they will serve a different purpose, but only the Tsaritsa can shed light on that. He also says that all rules in the world are curses, but to me, that doesn't mean much. Curse is an opinion word, like calling something good or bad. What he sees as a curse, another might see as a blessing. And lastly, more clarification of Paimon's origin. The Jester used Conrian technology to pull her out of Celestia while he was serving as a royal mage. He wasn't specifically going for her, he just wanted to see if he could get something, and Paimon is what he got. But no one cared, so she just wandered around his palace until the Cataclysm, and she was pretty much the same as she is now. The only weird thing is that she remembers nothing from before Traveler found her. Strangely, this is pretty much identical to the story Scaramouche told us about how the Traveler's twin was summoned to Conria. I don't think the two characters are related, but I do think that Horoptatyr later took Piero's technology and used it on the Traveler's spaceship, and that's where the twin came from. And a final point on that. While it seems that Paimon spent all her time cooped up in Piero's palace, which is probably why all the other Conrians we've met don't recognize her, we know one person who did live with Pierro, our twin. I think there's a good chance the twin also used to be friends with Paimon. Pierro didn't mention that, but like he said, he was too consumed with his competition with Horoptatyr to pay her any attention. Which all but confirms that his real identity is Eftervit, who we learned of back in the Cataclysm flashback during Nod Cry. And lastly, Mistelton is the Tsaritsa's spear that she's going to use to fight Celestia. Let me speedrun the end of the quest so that we can get to theories. Chuganov turns a new leaf and becomes a good guy. Lelek, aka Odette, gets kicked out of the Rokot, and all the Rokot get forgiven for their rebel activities, I guess. Odette learns Signora and Arlecchino conspired to give her a way to leave the Fatui, but she doesn't want it. Paimon and Traveler go shopping and meet Child and the real Tonia. And at the end, the Tsaritsa finally returns from fighting that big scary monster, coincidentally right when Project Stuja is put on hold. Kinda sus, but we'll just ignore that for now. Surely the Tsaritsa wouldn't just make up a monster as an excuse for why everything sucked during Project Stuja. Alright, so let's start there. This is something I noticed after the teaser, but this Tsaritsa song is really familiar. Listen to these two songs back to back. That second song is a track that plays inside the chasm. Now, someone better at music theory than me might have a better opinion, but to me, that's the same leitmotif. If you know anything about Genshin music, you know they love using leitmotifs to tie things together. Every single combat track is a variation of Photon of Fluctuation. Every single nation's introductory theme is a variant of Dream Aria, and so on. So why does the Tsaritsa's theme share a leitmotif with the chasm? My best guess is that whatever is trapped under the Spirit Stone in the chasm's bed might be related to the Tsaritsa. I had a random crazy theory that it might be the remains of Nibelung, but maybe it's actually the Voyager? You know, to go with the theory that the Tsaritsa is the first angel in disguise? I don't know. That's the best I got there. Next, Ronova and Pierro told us almost nothing new about Paimon, because there were already mountains of evidence for her being from Celestia. Her first being pulled to Conria is cool, but ultimately unimportant in the grand scheme of things unless they reveal that she actually did anything there. However, Ronova did obliterate pretty much every theory that Paimon is secretly any other character. In fact, one might say that she confirmed once and for all that Paimon is quite simply just Paimon. But let's dig into it a little more. She said Paimon Paimon has no power or authority, but I think she left out one other very important thing that Paimon lacks: a fate. Mona already confirmed this in 1.0. We just weren't sure why Mona couldn't read her fate. Well, I think we can now deduce why. Fate, along with power and authority, is bestowed by the Heavenly Principles, and they hadn't gotten around to bestowing any of that onto Paimon. They say Paimon is a creation of Celestia, but what was she created for? Well, I say she is an unused god, or unborn god, or god template, backup god, take your pick. I'm not sure what the best term would be. After the War of Funerary Flame, the Heavenly Principles likely mass-produced a bunch of gods, and every one of them started out just like Paimon. One by one, the Heavenly Principles gave them their power, authority, and fate, and then placed them onto Teyvat to serve their purpose. But Paimon, and possibly several others, were sitting unused in celestial storage in case they were needed later. When Pierro aimed his Conrian tech at Celestia to pull something down, he stole something from the backup god vault, and that was Paimon. So, what's the importance of this? My giga prediction for the end of the Teyvat chapter is that because Paimon is a completely blank slate of a god, that could allow her to assume the power and authority of any other god, or even every other god. And there's no fate looming over her that says she can't. I always thought that at the end of the story, Paimon would become the new ultimate ruler of Teyvat, but there wasn't really a good explanation as to how. There's still pieces missing, like the fact that only a Descender has the will for that, and she's not a Descender. But we are one step closer to a theory that Paimon could maybe take over Celestia. So I'll just leave that there for now, and get to my last crazy theory. We still don't have an answer to one of the first Paimon questions. How and why was she right off the shore from the Traveler one day, just coincidentally waiting to be fished up? Most people believe that someone put her there deliberately, and the common theories were either Asmodee or the Heavenly Principles, but I'd say both of those are debunked now. But there is one person who should have been acquainted with both Paimon and Traveler, and might have a motive to put them together, and that's the Traveler's twin. Given that both Paimon and the twin lived with Pierro, there's no way they didn't know each other, and after everything the twin has been through, if I'm right about what Paimon could potentially become, then the twin probably knows that too. So they probably put her with the Traveler on purpose, knowing their sibling would keep her safe until the time came. The twin might have even been able to wipe her memories, but I'm not sure about that part, so I won't proclaim that to be a theory just yet. Alright, that wraps up all I can think to say about the 7.0 Archon Quest. I need to get back to exploring so I can get that juicy world quest lore, and see what kind of video I want to make about them. So be sure to subscribe if you want to hear what's next and listen to me yap about more Genshin Impact lore. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I see you in the next one.